Hello, here is part two of our processing videos for PixInsights in particular. You will notice today we do want to get familiar with PixInsight. Remember, part one was about dealing with these two directories or folders and using one as our raw data and the other one, all of our process information will go into it. We are going to look at some lagoon nebulas first and images and various files. But in the meantime, we just want to go ahead and get familiar a little bit with PixInsight. That said, let me go ahead and clarify, make sure that we understand. In the first video, I mentioned there's a lot of common words in the Mac community versus the PC community. I'm by habit, I will call these right here directories. It's an old Windows and DOS speak, and so if I say directory, I mean folders. If I reference a document or a file, basically it comes down to those things that are like these files. So these are files, or we can call them documents of some type, which is a typical way of expressing it. But folders themselves are directories. So just make sure that we, in the event that you're confused by some of the things in part one, that's what I mean by it. So sometimes I will absent-mindedly call something a folder when it's a file and vice versa. So just be careful of that. PixInsight should be located in your bar down here at the bottom, your launch bar. So if I just single click on it, you'll see it starts to do its little bobbing action there. It means it's preparing to open. Just click it once. Patience is a virtue in astrophotography as well as with working with computers. Be careful not to triple click on various things because you're impatient. What can happen there is you'll end up opening 3 versions of PixInsight, and the next thing you know, you'll basically get lost in a whole collection of PixInsight instances. So just be patient, allow these things to come up. Now, immediately when it comes up, you'll notice that this process console is very important. It basically tells you as you do a process what's going on, what the computer's thinking of, and very importantly, the amount of time that maybe some process took. Versus where it is in a whole stack of images, for example. And so you can kind of follow that. In many cases, you'll have to let the computer kind of do its thing for a while and then just be patient and come back later and see what's going on with the data that you just did. And so, but anyway, you can always get outside of it by clicking on the outside of it. And if I want to see it again, all I have to do really is drag my cursor back over here to the upper left-hand side where it says Process Console, and I'm not clicking. You can hear that. Just it automatically comes up at any time there, and basically that's the only thing I ever use. I don't do anything with these other explorers. Sometimes you can get your processes through the Process Explorer. It's something I've never done. And but anyway, these are here if we want to explore a little bit more, no big deal. But basically the process console, and it will always come up by default on any process that we do. And so you can kind of look at it there if that's the case. But anyway, just opening PixInsight and looking at it first, you'll notice, of course, we have a lot of menus. Clicking on to quit PixInsight, I would come under that menu, no big deal. But anyway, I can load in various open things here if I want to. Typically speaking, believe it or not, you won't need to use this file menu much in PixInsight because most of the times that we open a file, it will be as a part of the process of what we're doing. So we're going to, each one of these processes, as you see here, of course, these are all the processes are listed here, and I will pretty much go to all processes through this tutorial as we're going through because I just want you to know that they're always under process, all processes. Now they are itemized within these little titles. So various things that deal with convolution or deconvolution or whatever, or they are categorized there. But I generally will just go under all processes for everything, and you'll notice that down here, if I just gently put the mouse over that arrow, I can see everything. You can also typically you can also scroll sometimes, depending on if you have the right mouse here. But usually, you just have to do it this way. Anyway, that's the processes that we'll talk about, and as I go into various processes. For example, if I go to calibrate images, which is typically the first thing we would do, you'll notice where it says add files here. So what I would do is I would go in and add those files, and then if I'm trying to calibrate a bunch of Lagoon Nebula files, that's usually what I would end up doing. And we'll do that here in a second. We'll look at that maybe in a different video. We'll talk about each of the different sections, each of those ways of processing individually. But right now, I just want to get used to you opening PixInsight and seeing some things in it. I think one of the most important things to do, though, let's go ahead and open one of those images. And again, we're just going to look at one of the Lagoon Nebula files. And if I go to File and Open, give it a second, it will give us a directory of things here. And if I look at, let's see, here's my desktop. It's real important as far as file navigation is concerned, making sure that I am always dealing with the desktop. So this right here tells me the actual directory that I'm in, the folder I'm in. And you'll notice all those, the JData, remember, is the one I was using, so don't worry about that one. So we're dealing basically with the raw data versus the processed data. And you can do this a couple of ways. You can double click in the raw data, or you can just keep arrowing down in the directory you need until you have the file you want. So I could do it that way, or I could just, notice if I click on raw data, double click, it gets me into the raw data file, which is here, and raw data directory. And then I can, just keep double clicking them. I can always backspace to navigate where I want, but it's entirely up to you the way you want to do it. I'm not very consistent with the way I choose to do it, but if I come down here to Lagoon, I'm just going to open up the very first of those images, which is right here. Notice when I click on it, it gives the open dialog is right here, so I can just press on it, and it will automatically open this file. It actually tells me, notice how it actually gives me information about the image right here, Nikon D810A file, and it tells me the pixel resolution, it tells me the ISO and the exposure length, so kind of interesting thing. Even up here it tells me more specifics about shutter and f-stop and things if it applies. Of course, we took this through the telescope with where the telescope was the aperture, so it's the way it is. Notice it initially collapses the image at, it's an RGB image, of course, at 1:15 ratio. That means that we're seeing this image a 15th of its original size. So it automatically just gets truncated down, or just squished down for you. So it's there. And we can always change that by coming to the zoom cursor up here. And I will typically use the actual cursor on the screen. There are shortcuts here for command. You can actually command plus plus or command plus minus, if you want to just shortcut it, but I'll typically just zoom it this way. Notice as I go up, I'm zooming in. Now that doesn't change the size of the window. If I want to if I want to maximize it, I can maximize it here to get a bigger window. Typically, that's the way I do it. If I click this, it gives me a selection of things I can do. Typically, I'll use these left-hand side things. I can make it an icon. I can close it. I can, you'll have to experiment a little bit with that. Notice the other thing about this, as I'm zooming in on this, you can obviously see that there are stars here, and notice how how dark the entire scene is. This, remember that our software will open it up the way it it appears on the actual data. This is what raw data looks like. Remember, these are dark objects, and we're taking shorter exposures. So the whole idea of processing, in fact, is to be able to bring up these levels to see what's there. So don't be surprised that all these files are dark when you open them up. That's just the way that typically they are. Remember, these are also raw files coming off the camera, so you're seeing it without any kind of processing that the camera might have done. When you take a picture of these images with the camera and you have, maybe you're taking pictures with JPEG in JPEG mode, well, the camera will automatically stretch those images for you. And that's the reason why sometimes on the camera they'll already look bright, because the camera is doing the processing for you. Now, it's something generally that we don't want the camera to do. We want to have control over the processes ourselves, and that's the reason why we like to shoot in RAW or NEF mode. Excuse me. As far as this goes, and now one of the important things about it is that we can tell PixInsight to kind of automatically show us what this would look like if we did stretch it. Stretching meaning that we can give it a kind of an artificially imposed brightness level across the screen as if we did process it. And to do that, you would go to screen transfer function, and I recommend that you always have a copy of this on your screen. I normally keep it right here on the lower right hand side. And there's just a few things that you need to understand about this. This link RGB channels dialog, generally speaking, you turn it off, and notice how it's clicked off now. Click on it, it's on. Click off. Now, but anyway, this is just going to, this links all the RGB channels to each other, so when you do some of the auto adjustments, it's going to lock those in relation to each other. And so, so you generally don't want that to happen. You want it to handle them individually. Now, this little nuclear button here is called auto stretch, and generally if I want to see what the data looks like just right off the bat, that's what I'll click. So if I do it here on the image, you'll notice that after the computer thinks about it a second, it will automatically kind of stretch the data for us so we can kind of see what's there. And obviously it's pretty amazing for a 45-second image. If I wanted to zoom this in a little bit more, I can see the nature of this image as far as from a noise standpoint. I could zoom it all the way in. Now, if I look in this little area right here, notice how every pixel has generally a different value, which is the whole concept of noise in the to begin with. The thought that these things are neighboring pixels obviously should be somewhat the same value, you would think, but in reality they very seldom are. So the whole idea of stacking multiple exposures is that at the end of those stacks, this whole background starts to get cleaned up, and neighboring pixels start to have closer and closer values one to another. So you don't, the image won't look as much like salt and pepper, and that's the whole idea of stacking multiple images. But in many cases, a lot of people, you could certainly, with good processing skills, even make something pretty nice out of this single image, especially if you use some noise reduction kind of techniques and more of the advanced techniques that we'll talk about later. But anyway, remember that this screen stretch that we have imposed, this auto stretch, is just simply an artificially stretched temporary thing. So this isn't permanent. We haven't done anything destructive to the file. If I want to save this, I could save it, certainly. And if I were to open it up again, believe it or not, it would be dark because I haven't done anything permanent to this image. I've only seen it that way. I've only seen it as such here, according to what the screen is showing me on auto stretch. So nothing. I haven't done anything permanent to the image. The other thing to notice is that you'll notice how as we go to the from the center and we go to the edges, notice how darker it is in the corners, and that is something that's going to be true of a large majority of the optics that we will use. It is, and that's the reason being is because light seems to pass much more readily, much more quickly in the center of the optics than it does at the edges. And of course, this is the reason why typically we want to flat field all of our images, because we want the light to pass through just as efficiently on the edges as we do the center. That flattens the image and makes sure that that the things that are supposed to be lit up are actually the things that are being lit up. So that's the reason why flat fields are important, and it's especially important with the Rasa telescope, because the Rasa does have a kind of a vignetting on the edges. It falls off pretty drastically on the edges, and that's a part of the design of the scope. It's also because these chips that we use nowadays are really kind of big, and so you can it becomes really important to have some dark frame for any time that we take an image. So as we are processing some of this data, I've had to create those flat fields artificially, which is an advanced technique. But generally speaking, I've had to do that myself because we just couldn't find. We took flat fields that night, but we couldn't find what we did with them. So. So anyway, there are workarounds. The better you get at this stuff, the better it is. So anyway, remember, we took about 30 or so images of this, and we will be able to bring it. We'll look at this in the second part of the video of how we might want to begin the process of a whole stack of images. But just remember that right now we can open any one image and we can look at it. And just as a rule of thumb, it is a good idea to just look at images. Realistically, we're not going to open up 30 images and look at them all. However, if we do zoom in and start to see some things, we can see some aberrations going on. We have the focus wasn't perfect. It's still not bad. But as you can see here, we would expect as we zoom in that these stars should be more round looking than they actually are. So there may be a little bit of trailing, maybe a little bit of wind affecting the image during the 45-second exposure, and maybe a little bit of these stars here are starting to get a little bit rectangular, excuse me, a little bit to look more like triangles, which typically is a little bit of a distortion in the optics and a little bit of aberration there. Not that critical at this wide of a field, but you can see just as I'm kind of scrolling around the image, some stars look better than others, and so it's just kind of the way it is. But still, this will produce a very good set of data, and it's certainly nothing like a permanently mounted telescope would, but you get the idea. By the way, when we talk about signal to noise ratio, and we will as we get into this, notice how that in brighter areas you don't have as big of a perception of the salt and pepper effect. In other words, so if I go into the heart of the lagoon here and I see the bright, let's say this bright area right in this region, notice how the pixels do look a little bit more uniform compared to one another. And as we get more and more into the fainter parts of the image, the salt and pepper really starts to come. And that's the reason why signal noise ratio is important. The more data, or the brighter the levels we have, the naturally more signal you have versus the noise. And so essentially by stacking the images, eventually we will be able to kind of average more signal into these fainter areas, and it will be less salt and pepper. So that in general, the high signal areas of an image are always going to be the brighter ones, especially in these shorter images. And meaning that, you know, if we could somehow increase the signal noise on the outskirts of the image, then obviously we're going to be able to have a pretty deep, nicely satisfying image that is pretty clean and able to be blown up and printed and something really to be proud of. So anyway, that is opening up a single image in PixInsight and then using the just the screen transfer to see it. By the way, if I want to see what this originally looked like, notice on the screen transfer dialog, this little reset button on the lower portion, I can turn it off again to show what it looks like more in a raw, as a raw file directly from the camera. If I want to turn the auto screen stretch back on, I can right there. This little check mark right here links this image that is open with this box. So if I have that checked off, then and I press reset, it's not going to apply to this image. So I have to make sure that if I want this image to be linked to this transfer, I have to have that little track view check mark going on. That allows me to be able to now control this image. Many times you'll have multiple images on a screen, and maybe you only want to change one image and not the other, and so you have to make sure that this dialog is linked, checked to the image you want. So just be aware of that, and that's the way that works. But anyway, just some basic things we will be dealing in our next video. We are going to look at calibration kind of dialogues, and making sure that we understand the purpose of image calibration, and how we would prepare the raw images with flat fields or dark frames as they apply. Generally speaking, with this camera, we're not going to use dark frames. There's really no reason to do so. Flat fields are important, but for the next video, I'll just show you how we do that with a flat field that I've produced myself artificially, and that will allow us to see the images a little bit cleaner, a little bit flatter, as if we did use a real flat field on it. It's not a substitute for a real flat field, but it does help us out a little bit. Anyway, that is the end of this video on PixInsight, getting familiar with it. There's so much more about it. We won't even begin to consider those other areas, but I just want you to get used to seeing things like the process console, knowing where the processes are, and being able to just be able to open PixInsight and not feel like you're way in over your head. Small steps at a time, and Rome was not built in a day, so just keep that in mind. We will continue in part 3 in a little bit, and we'll talk about calibration at that time. Bye.